Brielle Parker let out a curse under her breath as the train doors slammed shut in front of her face, and the screech of metal on tracks echoed through the small station. She stood frozen for a second, clutching her worn-out tote bag, her breath fogging in the chilly evening air. This wasn't supposed to happen. She'd been in Haven Ridge, a charming but unfamiliar town in upstate New York, for a quick job interview she didn't even get. Now she was stranded, alone, and her phone was dead. Fantastic. She turned and looked at the nearly empty platform. A few people milled about, either waiting for the next train or heading out. Her eyes landed on a man sitting on a bench, dressed in a black wool coat and dark jeans, a suitcase beside him. He looked too clean for this sleepy town, too polished. His hair was dark and perfectly styled, and he had the kind of face that made you pause, a sharp jawline, intense eyes, and a quiet confidence that made him look like he belonged in the pages of a magazine. He was watching her. Brielle straightened her shoulders. "Is there another train tonight?" she asked, forcing a polite tone despite the frustration bubbling under her skin. The man shrugged. "Not unless you want to wait until after midnight, and that one's usually delayed." "Of course it is," she muttered, rubbing her hands together. She had just enough cash for a cheap dinner and no hotel reservation. She could probably find a diner to sit in for a while if she didn't freeze first. "You're not from here," the man said. She turned to him. "Is it that obvious? You're staring at the schedule board like it personally offended you." That made her laugh just a little. It kind of did. He stood up then, tall and broad-shouldered, and extended a hand. "I'm Vance Sullivan." She hesitated. "Brielle Parker. Need help?" he asked casually, but there was something in his voice, genuine concern, not pity. "I'll figure it out," she said quickly, not wanting to seem helpless. "You're not figuring much out, just standing there freezing," he said, glancing at her thin jacket. "Look, there's a cafe across the street. Warm, well-lit, and they serve decent coffee. Join me," she eyed him. "You could be a serial killer," he gave a soft laugh. "Then I'd be the best-dressed one in Haven Ridge." She didn't know why she said yes. Maybe it was the way he said it, light, almost playful. Maybe it was the truth. She didn't have a better option. And maybe, deep down, she didn't want to be alone tonight. The cafe was quiet, cozy, and smelled like cinnamon rolls. A waitress led them to a booth in the back, and Vance ordered for both of them coffee for him, hot chocolate for her, and a plate of fresh pastries. "You didn't have to do that," Brielle said when the food arrived. "I wanted to," he replied, looking at her like it was no big deal. "So, what brings you to Haven Ridge?" she sighed. "A job interview, copywriting for a marketing firm. They decided to go with someone else." "That sucks." "Yeah, well, it's not the first time." She took a sip of her drink and added, "I'm trying to break into freelance writing." "But the rent in the city doesn't care about dreams." He studied her for a moment. "You always this honest with strangers?" "Only the ones who buy me pastries." That made him laugh again, and she couldn't help but smile. He looked different when he laughed, less polished, more human. They talked for an hour, maybe more. She told him about her degree in English Lit, her tiny apartment in Queens, her dream of writing a novel someday. He was more guarded, said he worked in investments and traveled a lot. She didn't press. But his watch looked expensive, and the coat he wore was definitely designer. "You're not just some regular guy waiting for a delayed train, are you?" she asked, half joking. He smiled. "Define regular." Before she could answer, the waitress walked over. "We're closing in 15 minutes. Brielle blinked. "That late already? I'll walk you to a hotel," Vance said immediately. "There's one around the corner, clean, safe." "I don't know if I can afford. I'll take care of it." She stiffened. "You don't have to do that." "I know," he said simply, "but I want to. You missed your train. It's cold. I'd feel better knowing you're not sleeping in some booth at a 24-hour diner." She looked at him for a long moment. Something about the way he said it, calm, no pressure, made it hard to argue, and maybe it was exhaustion or the fact that she hadn't felt this safe in a long time. "Okay," she said quietly. He paid the bill in cash, then held the cafe door open for her. The hotel was even nicer than he'd said, small but charming, with a fireplace in the lobby and a friendly woman at the front desk. Vance handed over his card without blinking, booked her a single room, and refused to let her argue about it. "I'll be back in the morning," he said as they stood in the hallway outside her room. "You don't have to, I want to," he said again. "You shouldn't have to figure this town out alone." She opened her mouth, closed it again. "Okay, thank you, Vance." His eyes softened. "Get some rest, Brielle." She watched him walk away, wondering what kind of stranger did all this without asking for anything in return. She didn't know that the billionaire she'd just met, who was supposed to fly out that night on his private jet, had canceled everything the second she missed her train. Brielle blinked awake to soft morning light filtering through the curtains, the unfamiliar scent of lavender and cedarwood lingering in the air. For a second, she forgot where she was. Then the memory of the train station, the missed opportunity, and the stranger who refused to let her disappear into the cold came rushing back. She sat up slowly, brushing her hair out of her eyes. The room was quiet, too nice for what she could ever afford on her own. A small envelope rested on the nightstand beside a steaming paper cup of coffee. Her name was written on the front in sharp, elegant handwriting. She opened it, figured you'd want something warm before you face Havenridge again. "I'll be in the lobby at 9. Vance Brielle checked the small clock on the wall. It was 8:35. She dressed quickly in the same clothes from yesterday. There was no other option, and twisted her hair into a loose knot. She debated whether to go down at all. He didn't owe her anything. Maybe he was just being polite. Maybe he'd already left. But when she stepped off the stairs into the lobby, he was there. Leaning against the fireplace, Vance looked like he belonged in a world far removed from quiet inns and forgotten train stations. Today he wore a navy wool coat over a charcoal turtleneck, and his posture radiated steady, effortless control. He looked up the moment she entered. "I wasn't sure you'd come down," he said. "I wasn't sure I should," she admitted. "You look like you slept terribly." She blinked. "Wow." "Thanks," he grinned. "I meant it as a compliment. You look like you were up all night thinking, which means you're the kind of person who doesn't let the world numb her." She studied him. "Is that supposed to be flattering?" It was supposed to be honest. Their eyes held for a beat too long. "I need to catch the noon train," she said, breaking the moment. "Assuming it's not cursed like yesterday's. You could let me drive you instead." She blinked. "You have a car, I have a driver." Of course he did. She hesitated. "Why, you missed your train again." "And I still feel responsible. I'm not your project. I never said you were." "Then what am I?" He stepped forward just enough that she had to tilt her chin to keep eye contact. "Someone I'd like to know better." Brielle folded her arms, unsure what to say to that. "Where are we going?" "I figured you could use breakfast, real breakfast, not something served in a paper bag." She followed him outside without committing to anything. A sleek black sedan with tinted windows waited at the curb. The man in the driver's seat stepped out and opened the rear door wordlessly. She paused. "You weren't kidding." "I rarely do." Inside, the car smelled faintly of leather and citrus. Brielle sat stiffly, unsure how to belong in something so clean and silent, but Vance was already speaking to the driver in a low voice. The restaurant he took her to sat at the edge of the lake, tucked behind a row of picturesque old buildings. Inside, the walls were exposed stone, the windows stretched floor to ceiling, and every table had crisp white linens and fresh flowers. They were seated near the window, overlooking the water. "This is..." She began, then stopped. "Too much," he offered. She nodded. "Why are you doing this?" Vance looked at her for a long moment, then leaned back in his chair. "I've spent the last 7 years in boardrooms and airports, surrounded by people who only speak when they want something. Yesterday, you looked me in the eye and accused me of being a serial killer." She flushed. "That wasn't exactly, it was honest and unexpected, and I haven't stopped thinking about you since." She stared at him. "That's not normal, maybe not. But it's true." Their server arrived with menus, but Brielle barely glanced at hers. Her mind was still spinning. "You said you work in investments," she said slowly. "Is that code for something?" "Technically, I'm the CEO of a venture capital firm. We fund startups. mostly tech, some medical. I built it with my brother. He passed away 2 years ago and I've been running it alone since. She softened. I'm sorry. He nodded once, gaze steady. He was the only family I had left. After that, I stopped caring about the usual things, except work. Until yesterday. Brielle traced a fingertip over the rim of her water glass. You don't know anything about me. I could be a disaster. You could, he said, but I don't think you are. She looked away, unsure how to respond. Their food arrived quietly: eggs, fresh fruit, warm croissants, and something with hollandaise she couldn't pronounce. She ate without speaking for a while, grateful for the distraction. After a few minutes, he said, "What would you write about if money wasn't a problem?" She blinked. "That's out of nowhere. I'm asking because I want to know." She hesitated. "I used to write stories, fiction. Then I started freelancing blogs, product copy, marketing blurbs. It all started to feel the same, like I was typing words just to fill space." His voice dropped slightly. "But what would you write if you could write anything?" She looked at him. "I guess, something about people who don't fit, who fall through cracks but still find each other." Vance's gaze didn't waver. "Sounds like something I'd read." She pushed her plate aside. "Why does a man like you care what a woman like me writes about?" "Because I've had everything money can buy," he said quietly. "And none of it ever made me feel the way I did when I heard you laugh in that cafe." Brielle stared at him, heart thudding. "You're insane." "Possibly," he said. "But I'm not lying. I still have to go back," she said, more to herself than to him. "I have rent, a cat, a temp job that barely pays for groceries." He reached into his coat and pulled out a sleek card. "I'm not offering charity, I'm offering work. My firm needs someone to help shape our new brand voice. I need someone who actually understands people, not just metrics." She didn't touch the card. "You just met me, I know. You don't even know if I'm good." "I trust my instincts," she shook her head. "You really don't play by any rulebook, do you?" He smiled. "Only the ones worth keeping." Brielle looked down at the card. Her world had shifted again, too fast to process. But her gut said this wasn't about the job, not really. And for the first time in a long time, her gut wasn't afraid. The sky had turned a hushed slate gray by the time Vance's driver pulled up to the stone building just off the highway, far from the quiet charm of Havenridge. Brielle stepped out of the car, boots crunching against the gravel as she took in the unexpected sight. A sprawling, converted textile mill turned modern office space nestled beside a frozen creek. "This is your company?" she asked, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "One of our satellite branches," Vance said, closing the car door behind him. "I wanted you to see it before you go back to the city. You didn't mention we were driving an hour out of town. If I had, would you have come?" She glanced at the glass-paneled entrance, the clean steel lettering above it that read, "Sullivan Strategic." "Probably not." "Exactly," he said, holding the door open. Inside, the warmth hit her instantly. The interior was all clean lines, reclaimed wood, and minimalist design, equal parts industrial and sleek. As they walked through the main corridor, people in tailored clothes nodded at Vance, but none approached. It was clear he commanded respect here, even in silence. They reached a door at the end of the hall. He opened it, revealing a private office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the snowy creek, and a desk so large it could double as a conference table. A single photograph sat beside his computer, a candid snapshot of 2 young men standing in front of a small storefront, both grinning, both holding a banner that read, "First round funding secured." Brielle stepped toward it. "Your brother," Vance nodded once, then walked past her to open a sleek cabinet, pulling out a thin folder. "I'm not going to pitch you again," he said. "But this is the project I mentioned. We're rebuilding our brand voice. The firm's grown faster than we expected, and now we're trying to make it feel human again. I want the messaging to reflect that." She opened the folder. Inside were mock-ups, tone guides, and raw content drafts, all stiff, clinical, and cold. "This reads like it was written by a very polite robot," she said. "Exactly." She looked up. "You really want me to rework this? I want you to tear it apart and start over. And if I say no, then I'll thank you for your time and we'll drive you to the train." She studied him. "And if I say yes, then I'll pay you well, you'll work remotely on your own schedule, and I'll get to keep seeing you." Brielle's breath caught. "That last part wasn't in the folder, no," he said. "That part's personal." She closed the file. "I don't mix personal and professional. You could make an exception." "I don't do exceptions." He walked to the window, resting a hand on the frame. "Then just take the job. We'll figure the rest out later." She stared at the polished wood floor, her thoughts racing. The offer was better than anything she'd seen in months. Flexible, creative, and well-funded. But more than that, it was the look in his eyes, like he saw something in her she hadn't let herself believe in years. "I'll think about it," she said finally. "That's all I'm asking." On the drive back, the mood had shifted. The air between them was thicker, more uncertain. She watched the snow-dusted landscape blur past the window, her fingers absently tracing the seam of her coat. "You ever take a break?" she asked suddenly, not looking at him. "From what?" "From being the one with all the answers." He turned slightly toward her. "No one has all the answers. You act like you do. I act like someone who knows what he wants." She looked at him then. "And what is that exactly, you?" The word dropped like a stone in her stomach. She didn't speak for a moment, didn't blink. This was too fast, too much, but it wasn't desperation in his voice, it was certainty. "I don't know what to do with that," she said quietly. "You don't have to do anything," he replied. "Not yet." When they reached the train station, he stepped out of the car with her. The platform was nearly empty, the wind curling around their coats. "I meant what I said," he told her, his voice low. "About wanting to get to know you, not as some passing thing." "Not on a clock." She glanced at the sky, then at the approaching train. "You don't even know what kind of mess I am. I'll take my chances." The train pulled in with a rumble. She hesitated at the door, one hand on the cold metal handle. "I'm not promising anything," she said. "I'm not asking for promises. Just don't disappear." "I won't," he said. "And if you need me, you'll know where to find me." She boarded, found a window seat, and watched as he stood there, hands in his coat pockets, not moving until the train pulled away. She didn't know what she was walking toward. But for the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid of what came next. Brielle stepped off the elevator, her heels clicking against the marble floor as the receptionist behind the curved glass desk gave a small nod. The office was crisp, modern, and unmistakably high-powered. But it was the man standing at the far end of the executive suite, his back to her, hands tucked into his pockets, staring out at the Manhattan skyline that made her stomach twist. She'd been working remotely for Sullivan Strategic for 6 weeks, submitting drafts, refining tone, and guiding their rebrand from faceless to human. Every email from Vance had been direct but warm. Every phone call had ended with a pause, as if he didn't want to hang up. But this was the first time they'd seen each other since the train station, and Brielle was no longer unsure. He turned the moment she stepped inside. His expression didn't change, but something in his shoulders shifted as if he'd been holding his breath without realizing it. "I wasn't sure you'd actually come," he said. "You asked me to," she replied, folding her coat over her arm. "I didn't expect you'd say yes." "I didn't say anything. I just showed up." Vance walked closer, stopping just short of touching her. "That's more than I hoped for." She looked around the office. "So this is the real headquarters. This is where the pressure lives. You don't look like someone suffocating. I've learned to function on the edge of it." Brielle lowered her eyes, then looked at him again. "What are we doing, Vance?" His answer was immediate. "I'm hoping you'll have dinner with me tonight." Her chest tightened. "This isn't about a job anymore." "No," he said quietly. "It never was." She didn't move. "I don't date clients. I've already reassigned the project." "You're no longer under me. That's one way to solve it." "I didn't want any gray area, Brielle. Not with you." She studied him. There was no performance in his voice, no charm for charm's sake. Just the same intensity that had wrapped itself around her back in Havenridge and hadn't let go since. "You really canceled your flight that night?" she asked suddenly. "Yes. and stayed in that town for someone you'd spoken to for less than an hour. I don't make decisions based on time, he said. I make them based on instinct. I don't know if that's romantic or reckless. For me, they're usually the same thing. Something cracked in her then. A quiet, unseen place inside her chest where she'd been holding back, fearful of falling too fast, of trusting what felt too good. But now, standing here, staring at a man who had offered her a lifeline before she even knew she needed one, she couldn't pretend anymore. She exhaled, slow and shaky. "Where's dinner?" His mouth tilted slightly. "I have a place in Tribeca, private chef." "No reservations required." "Do I need a dress code?" "No," he said. "Just you." The apartment was unlike anything she expected. The elevator opened directly into a 2-story penthouse, flooded with soft light and lined with bookshelves, original art, and a piano tucked into the corner. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, but the space itself felt calm, almost reverent. A woman in a crisp apron greeted them, offered wine, then disappeared into the kitchen without fanfare. Vance poured them each a glass, then led her to the sofa. "I thought this place would be cold," Brielle admitted, curling a hand around the stem of her glass. "But it's not. I don't bring many people here." She turned to him. "Why me?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he set his glass down and reached into a drawer on the side table, pulling out a thin, leather-bound notebook. "I found this last week," he said. "It's my brother's. He used to keep notes on ideas, businesses that didn't exist yet, people he wanted to help. I flipped through it and your name was scribbled on one of the pages." Brielle froze. "What?" "I didn't understand at first. Then I remembered we funded a local arts program in Queens 3 years ago. They featured an aspiring writer who taught workshops for kids. You gave a reading. He must have stayed after to talk to you." Her breath caught. "I barely remember that." He didn't. He wrote, "She sees people, not just their stories, who they are under them." She sank back into the cushions, stunned. "I think he knew before I did," Vance said. "That's someone like you. Doesn't come around twice." She set her glass down on the table, hands trembling slightly. "I've spent a long time trying to be invulnerable," she said. "Pretending I didn't need anyone, that I could carry everything alone. You don't have to anymore." Her eyes met his. "I want to believe you. Then believe me." The air between them shifted. She leaned forward, kissed him soft at first, then fuller as his hands found the small of her back. It wasn't desperate, it wasn't rushed. It was the kind of kiss that said, "I see you, and I'm staying." Dinner came and went in a blur of warmth and laughter. They lingered over dessert, sharing stories they hadn't said out loud before his fear of becoming like the men who chased profit without purpose. Her nightmares of waking up one day and realizing she'd given up on herself. Later, on the rooftop garden blanketed in soft lights, she looked out over the city and said, "You know, I never told you this, but I almost didn't get on that train to Havenridge. I missed the first one because I couldn't decide if it was even worth going." He wrapped an arm around her waist. "Then I should thank that first train for running late." She leaned into him, her voice quieter now. "Everything changed because of it." Vance tilted her chin up, his gaze steady and sure. "No. Everything changed because you let me in." The snow began to fall softly around them, tiny flecks catching in her hair. He looked at her like she was the only thing that had ever made sense. And then, without ceremony, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Her breath stopped. "I wasn't going to do this yet," he said. "But sometimes life doesn't wait for perfect timing. Sometimes it just finds you on a train platform." He opened the box. Inside, a ring glittered, simple, elegant, and unmistakably meant for her. "I want to build something that lasts. With you, not tomorrow, not someday, now." Brielle stared at him, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. "I don't even know what to say. Say yes." She laughed through the ache in her throat. "Of course it's yes." He slid the ring onto her finger, and the second it settled there, she felt it, the click of something falling perfectly into place, not because she'd planned it, not because she'd waited for it, but because she'd missed a train in a town she didn't know, and met a man who turned out to be everything she didn't know she needed. And now, She was exactly where she was meant to be. The following morning, Brielle stood barefoot in the kitchen of the Tribeca penthouse, wrapped in one of Vance's oversized button-down shirts as sunlight streamed through the tall windows. Her ring caught the light when she reached up to tuck her hair behind her ear, and something about the way it shimmered made her pause. It was real, not just the proposal, not just the man asleep in their bed. The life that was unfolding around her, unexpected, unplanned, but deeply, unmistakably hers. Vance stepped into the doorway, still barefoot himself, his hair slightly tousled and a gray t-shirt clinging to his frame. He leaned one shoulder against the doorframe, watching her. "I was going to bring you coffee," he said. "I beat you to it." "You always do," he said, walking over and plucking a mug from the counter. She handed it to him. "You're not working today?" "No meetings until late afternoon." "I told my assistant I was unavailable until further notice." She raised an eyebrow. "Is that what we're calling this? Further notice?" He pulled her into him, resting his forehead against hers. "I've spent years building a world that made sense." Then you walked into it, and suddenly logic felt overrated. She traced a finger along his jaw. "You're not worried this is all happening too fast?" He shook his head. "Fast isn't the problem. Missing it would have been." They stayed like that for a while, wrapped in the kind of quiet that only came when there was nothing left to hide. When they finally pulled apart, she returned to the counter and picked up her laptop. "I've been thinking," she said, fingers hovering over the keys. "About the brand voice project. I know I said I didn't want to mix work and personal, but I've got something I want to show you." "You're always welcome to mix the magic and the madness, Brielle. Show me." She turned the screen toward him. "I reworked the campaign pitch. It's not about numbers or market share. It's about connection, about vulnerability, about telling people that power doesn't have to mean distance." He read through it in silence, his brow furrowing in concentration. When he looked up, something flickered in his eyes that hadn't been there before. "You didn't just rewrite it, you gave it a soul." "I figured that's what you were trying to find when you hired me." "It was. But somewhere along the way I found you instead." Her chest tightened. "You're not going to make me cry before breakfast, are you?" "I'd never dare," he said. "Not without pancakes." Later that afternoon, they walked through Central Park, a habit they'd started forming in small, unspoken ways. Every step together now held a rhythm, as if their lives had quietly aligned when no one was looking. People passed them by, bundled in coats and scarves, but the two of them moved in their own world. Vance stopped beneath a cluster of bare-limbed trees near the fountain, pulling out his phone and handing it to a nearby passerby. "Would you mind taking a photo?" Brielle laughed. "Are you serious? You'll thank me when you're old and sentimental." She leaned into him as the stranger snapped the photo. When they stepped away, she looked at the image, his arm around her, her smile unguarded, the city behind them. She tapped the screen. "I think this is the first photo I've taken where I look settled." He glanced at her. "Do you feel that way?" "I think I'm starting to." That night, she unpacked the last of her belongings in the penthouse. What had once been temporary, a drawer, a toothbrush, a spare sweater, was now permanent. Her books filled his shelves, her charger tangled with his. Their lives were no longer separate stories. They were chapters in the same book. As she tucked a worn journal into a drawer beside the bed, she paused. Vance stood by the window, phone in hand, speaking quietly to someone on the other end. "I don't want to sell," he said. "Not yet. I think there's more to do, something better." He ended the call and turned to find her watching. "You're not selling the company?" "Not anymore," he said. "I thought I wanted out, but I don't want to leave something behind just because I was tired." She walked to him, slipping her arms around his waist. "So what changed?" He looked down at her. "You did. You reminded me why I built it in the first place, not for power. For purpose." "I'm proud of you," she said softly. "I'm proud of us." 3 months later, they stood at the edge of the Amalfi Coast, the sea stretching endless and blue beneath a sky streaked with gold. The villa was private, nestled into the cliffs, surrounded by blooming lemon trees and the scent of salt and jasmine. It was just the two of them, no guests, no fanfare. Only a local efficient, a soft breeze, and the quiet promise of forever. Brielle wore a simple ivory slip dress, her hair pinned loosely, her eyes fixed on the man who had rewritten every rule she thought she had to follow. Vance took her hands, his voice steady. "You once told me you write stories about people who fall through the cracks, but you didn't fall, Brielle. You flew, and I've spent every day since trying to keep up." She blinked, tears catching at the corners of her lashes. "I never believed in fate," she whispered. "But then I missed a train and found the rest of my life waiting on a bench. When they kissed, the world didn't disappear. It simply quieted, as if the wind itself bowed in reverence." That night, wrapped in linen sheets with the windows open to the sound of waves, Brielle turned to him in the dark. "Do you ever think about how close we came to missing each other?" He brushed his fingers down her arm. "Every day. And if I'd caught that train, then I would have tracked you down anyway. That cafe wasn't the only place I saw you. You once taught a writing class in the East Village. I watched from the back for 10 minutes. You read something about hope, and I remember thinking, that woman's going to ruin me." She laughed quietly. "Why didn't you say anything?" "I didn't think I was ready for someone like you." And now, he kissed her shoulder. "Now I know I was made for you." As the moon drifted higher over the sea and their fingers intertwined beneath the covers, neither of them spoke again. There was nothing left to be said. Their hearts had already spoken in all the ways that mattered, and it was enough, always would be.